Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Coffee and Tea with AARP Connecticut. It's our biweekly conversation in which AARP staff and volunteers talk to Connecticut decision makers about policies and programs that are of interest to older residents. My name is John Erlingheuser, and I am the Senior Director of Advocacy and Community Outreach here at AARP Connecticut. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by one of our great AARP Connecticut volunteers, Margeret Lewis. Thanks for being with us today, Margeret. And why don't you tell the folks before we get started with our conversation, a little bit about yourself, what you do for AARP, what your background is, so people can get an idea about our guests today.
Hey, thanks, John. I'm so excited to be here with you. As you said, I'm Margeret Lewis, and I'm a volunteer from Stratford, Connecticut. I live here with my husband of 43 years, and we have an adult daughter and two little dogs. For the past 2 years, I've worked with AARP on the advocacy and caregiving teams. And whenever legislature is in session, I'm able to run up to Hartford and talk about how concerned older Americans are about certain tasks that are in front of them. Personally, however, I work as a full-time caregiver for my 90-year-old mother. One of my biggest responsibilities for her is to help her manage on a very small income. So I'm always watching her budget. And I come from a marketing and operations background. I owned an agency in Westport for 35 years. I was senior partner there. So making ends meet and watching that bottom line has always been important to me. So I'm very interested in how this is going to affect older Americans.
Margeret, you're really indicative of some of the great AARP volunteers that we have that work on all kinds of issues for us at the state and federal level on issues like caregiving and the impact of utilities have on people's bottom line. So we appreciate all the work that you do for our volunteers and our members across the state of Connecticut. So it's also my pleasure to welcome today Claire Coleman. And Claire is the Consumer Counsel for the state of Connecticut. And Claire, before we talk a little bit about the Office of Consumer Counsel, why don't you tell us about your background, maybe some other positions you've previously held in government and or outside of government, so our folks can get to know you a little bit before we talk about the core issues involved in the Consumer Counsel's office.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me this morning, especially at this critical time when energy prices are so high. It's really important to continue this collaborative relationship with the AARP. I so appreciate our partnership and really hope that the work we do can help benefit AARP members. So appreciate being here today. Margeret, great to meet you. Really nice to have a conversation with you today. So I became the Consumer Counsel in December of 2021. Hard to believe it's been about almost 2.5 years, but it has, and every day has been intense doing this very, very important job. So I came to the Consumer Counsel's office after spending a couple years with the Lamont administration under the Office of Policy and Management as an undersecretary for legal affairs. And my energy background and interest really stem from work I did previously at the U.S. House of Representatives. I worked on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee and particularly led a lot of the work around regulatory reform and the environmental and energy regulations that were being debated during the Obama administration. So then when I returned to Connecticut, in fact, to the town I grew up in. And I worked as an energy attorney for a local environmental nonprofit, Save the Sound, as well as a lawyer in private practice at Wigan and Dana, which is a well-known law firm here in Connecticut, where I did regulatory compliance and litigation work. And I have some other experience in New York when I first graduated from law school. But I think in general, I see the blend of policy, investigations, litigation, regulatory work that I've done, all really culminating and blending together really well to help support the work that we do in the Office of Consumer Counsel, which really is, a combination of all of those types of services that we provide on behalf of consumers.
That's really great. And I can just say that we have worked with you on multiple areas in your different facets of your career, whether it was in Congress or with the Lamont administration or at Save the Sound. So AARP has always had a strong relationship with you in various levels. So it's really great to be able to work with you on the Office of Consumer Counsel. So at this point, let me turn it over to Margeret. And Margeret, why don't you take it from there? And I make sure you are off mute and able to ask your question.
Thank you. And Claire, I guess most ratepayers just don't know what the Office of Consumer Counsel does. Can you tell our audience a little bit about what it does and what things have a positive impact on our ratepayers?
Sure, I would be happy to. I have a really dedicated team of lawyers, finance specialists, accountants, economists, research specialists, all focused on our statutory obligation to represent the interests of consumers, which are often called ratepayers because consumers do pay rates every month, as I know all of the AARP members are aware of. So our office was actually established in 1975. We're coming up on our 50th anniversary and hope to use that moment to educate about the important work we do and help get the word out, because we are day to day in regulatory proceedings before the Public Utility Regulatory Authority. We're in judicial proceedings where, for example, a utility might appeal a ruling of the Public Utility Regulatory Authority, or our office might appeal a ruling as well if we feel like it wasn't in the best interest of ratepayers. So we go to court. We follow these decisions from the regulatory body to the courts to make sure that the interests of consumers are represented. And we also do a lot of policy work, both in the state legislature, as well as being involved in federal and regional efforts. We have a seat on the New England Power Pool, which is the transmission organization that oversees the regional grid. And then we do some work in front of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission as well, because they do approve transmission rates and that do show up on customer bills. We've also, and I've tried to really focus on affordability issues. So it's been a really great pleasure to serve with Nora Duncan, your state leader on the Low Income Energy Advisory Board. I currently serve as a chair and she's the vice chair, and we've had a great partnership and I've learned a lot from her leadership. And through that effort, we really focus on affordability issues, including looking at what are the energy burdens of seniors and how can we help address those needs. So I could go on and on. We do a lot of work in the legislature, as John mentioned. Together, we've had joint successes with the AARP. But between the policy, litigation, and regulatory work, we are a very busy, small and mighty team.
Well, and I will just say that we have one of the strongest offices of consumer counsel in terms of the responsibility the law gives it in the nation, and we have been very lucky, at least over the last several years, both with who has been the consumer counsel with you, Claire, and then your predecessor, Alan Katz, who have just been great and effective advocates for ratepayers. So people look to Connecticut as the shining star and example of what a consumer counsel actually should be, and not you've told us a lot about what it is, and it's amazing to me that not every state actually even has one. So I think we're really lucky here in Connecticut that we have one, and that we've had quality people that have taken over that office. So we're at here we are in July, and I know a little people might be a little confused, about when they get their next electric bill, and whether they live in the Eversource or United Illuminating territory. There are going to be some changes that are going to happen on their bill and they started to take effect on July 1. And so, what is the impact that these changes are going to have, and what exactly is happening?
Sure, that's a really important question. And I know this can be confusing because there have been headlines pointing to both an incoming increase and an incoming decrease. And some of you may have received bills already or may soon be receiving bills that have different changes. So I'm happy to kind of unpack that. There are changes to the electric bill effective July 1st. Which will likely come in your next bill cycle on both the supply side of the bill and the delivery side of the bill. So on the, I do want to flag at the outset that some of you may have noticed that the way your bill comes to you, what it looks like, looks different than it used to. That's a result of a proceeding at PURA, our regulatory body that looked at how do we make the bill more understandable. So we certainly welcome further feedback on this new bill design, which breaks down the electric bill so customers have an understanding of the four main components, which are supply, transmission, local delivery, and public benefits. So the decrease you've heard of is on the supply side. And this is only for customers who are standard service customers. That is, you receive your energy supply through your utility. And those standard service supply rates change every 6 months based on a procurement process that is approved by the state. And in general, winter prices are usually higher than summer prices in Connecticut. The last 2 winters have been particularly high spikes because of various global impacts and weather impacts. 2 years ago, as you'll recall, the war in Ukraine triggered a global energy crisis. And while this winter's rates were comparably lower to that, we do look forward every summer to lower rates when the gas supply constraints don't impact our rates so directly. So, for example, Eversource customers who were on standard service are until June 30th have been paying 14.8 cents. And effective July 1st, we'll be paying 8.995 cents. So that's a nice reduction in the supply rate per kilowatt hour. And United Illuminating customers similarly are seeing a decrease from 16.9 to about 11.9. So to put that in terms of monthly bill impact, Eversource standard service customer who uses about 700 kilowatt hours a month, which is the average, was paying about $104 for that supply portion, but now we'll be paying only $63. And for UI, it went from 119 to about 83. So that's the good news. The bad news is that on the other side of the bill, the delivery side of the bill, we're seeing some significant increases. And that is a result of an annual proceeding before our regulatory authority called a rate adjustment mechanism proceeding, which really serves to true up costs of our utilities from the prior year. We project cost each year and try to get as close as we can to what the cost of service will be. But for those items which are known as sort of pass-through costs that they're required to provide service on and are not receiving a markup on, we do what's called a true up to make sure that the costs are reflective of the actual service costs, the charges on the bill. So PURA had to adjust certain charges related to Eversource and UI's provision of these distribution system services. And importantly, I do want to flag that while these collective changes will amount to an overall increase in customer bills, it will depend on the impact on your bill will depend on whether you're a standard service customer or a third-party supplier customer.
So Claire, ironically, the utilities, Eversource UI, have really very little impact on any of these changes, right? Because they really have no financial skin in the game when it comes to standard service. And when it comes to the delivery and this increase, they're really only getting reimbursed for expenses that they've incurred as a result of pass-through charges that they were required to put on their bill. And I'm the first one that would like to take whack at the utilities anytime we can, but in fairness to them, this really isn't their doing
Yeah,
for the
that's
most
right,
part.
John. Where we can get under the hood and do and try to cut costs as much as possible is through the distribution rates established
Right.
through a rate case, which you've heard a lot about through the news in recent years. UI recently went through a rate case, as some our water utilities have gone through. Eversource has not been in for a while.
Right.
But in terms of this rate adjustment mechanism, you're correct. Some of the costs, for example, are the costs of the Millstone contract, which was a result of a public act. So they're reflecting the cost of service for that, but not taking a markup. So unfortunately, yes, it's a frustration to me as well, but there are not the same level of opportunities to kind of say, hey, let's cut down this increase, because it is
Right.
reflective of those costs of services that have that support reliability, energy
Right.
supply, affordability.
Great. So Margaret, you're
Yes.
up.
Is there any way that ratepayers can get control of their bill, or if they need assistance, what can they do?
Yes, really important question. And there are actions that you can take as a consumer to try to lower your bills. First, in terms of the choice I talked about between the third-party supplier market and standard service, Connecticut is a state that has a third-party supplier market, so you can look to that for lower rates. Now, we caution customers because in the last few years, there have been opportunities on the Energize CT rate board for customers to find lower rates than standard service, particularly as we've had these high bumps in winter months in the standard service. The EnergizeCT.com website is really the only trusted source to explore and pursue these cost savings. But we want to caution customers because sometimes these short-term savings can end up being long-term losses if you're not vigilant and really monitoring your rate as compared to a standard service rate. So we've looked at the data in recent years and see that a lot of customers are still paying a third-party supplier rate that's old and in many cases higher than both current third-party supplier offerings and the standard service rate. So we urge all of the AARP members here listening today to check your bill, check your contracts, and compare it to the standard service rate, and try to do that, every 6 months when the standard service rate changes, to make sure you're getting the lowest cost. Now, in terms of what else customers can do, I always like to remind customers that you do have control over usage, right? And that is what impacts how high your bill is. For example, energy consumption tends to increase in the summertime by about 35% because of air conditioning use. So while those supply rates are coming down, monitoring usage is really important, and really making sure that you're only using the level of cooling that you need in your home at a given time to stay safe and healthy and comfortable. And then, of course, energy efficiency efforts are really important. One of our favorite mottos is the cheapest energy is the energy you never use. And there are great programs in the state also available through the Energize CT website that allows you to receive a home energy audit and assess some of those options for bringing long-term savings to your home.
Claire, why don't you touch a little bit on those energy assistance programs?
Sure. So in addition to those actions I just talked about, we have great programs in Connecticut. We have the Connecticut Energy Assistance Program, which is really the targeted heating program. It's a federal program that is administered by our State Department of Social Services, but allows households whose incomes fall below 60% of the state median income, which, for example, a two-person household is about $54,000 a year. And also, if you qualify for disability benefits, you would automatically qualify for SEEP. So we urge all of the members to check eligibility, because that is a source of funding that comes from the federal government intended to help ease this burden of both heating and cooling costs to some extent. There are also utility managed programs. There are what are known as matching payment programs and bill forgiveness programs. And there's a few different options. On our website, we've issued a consumer alert, which provides links to UI and Eversource landing pages that can bring you to these different bill assistance programs. And also just calling your utility, and they can walk you through what options might be available to you. But there are options that if you pay a bill every month, the EDC will match that and help you reduce any back bill payments, which can really help free up customers of old debt, and something that is a priority as we're still coming out of COVID-19, the pandemic, and some of the economic impacts of that. These bill payment assistance programs really help customers take back control of their monthly utility bill.
Well, that's great. There's a lot out there, and so I'm going to ask you one more quick question, and then I'm going to let Margaret wrap up with our final question after that. So, if you could just briefly, Claire, I know you talked about all the cases before PURA, the proceedings. Maybe you can just give us a highlight of the top couple of proceedings that you think ratepayers might be interested in that are before PURA.
Sure. So, because how much you pay on your electric bill is obviously of chief concern, the proceedings, the distribution rate case proceedings that we work in and sort of serve as the prosecutor. If you imagine PURA as like the judge, and the utilities are presenting their case of why they need a rate increase, and my team comes in and really breaks that down and tries to identify areas where we can reduce costs. So those are really significant and impactful to your bill. We did just finish a big base distribution rate case for the two gas companies under Avangrid, Connecticut Natural Gas and Southern Connecticut Gas. They came in asking for substantial rate increases, and we just filed briefs on Friday after looking at all the evidence, actually advocating for a decrease in bills as opposed to an increase. So now that is before PURA's consideration to determine what the final rate established will be. On the policy side and sort of transformational work that we're doing, we are deeply engaged in what's called a performance-based rate-making docket. And this is really exciting to us because the goal of these proceedings is really to find a way to draw a closer connection between the customer experience and utility services, and drive utility investments and actions towards those areas where we see actual benefit to customers. And there is an ongoing, 3 different ongoing proceedings which are helping develop that new performance-based rate-making framework. And my team, we've been presenting proposals on how to transition our utility regulatory framework to one that is more performance-based. So even though rates are really high in Connecticut, we, sort of a comfort level can be that we're actually getting services that benefit you. And that's something that we're really focused on through those proceedings.
Awesome. So Margaret, why don't you wrap us up here, and then I'll give us some closing words.
Sure. How can average ratepayers get involved in the proceedings that are in front of PURA?
Great question. And I do want to say at the outset that we so appreciate the AARP membership's engagement in PURA proceedings. We read all of the letters that come in, the petitions that come in. The authority often cites them in their final decisions when considering the impacts of rate adjustments on consumers. So you're already doing such great work in this area, but there's always room for more voices. And PURA and my office do encourage participation by individuals. You can participate individually, not just as a member of the AARP. You can always file comments, even through email. There is an email address. It's pura.executivesecretary@ct.gov, where any correspondence that comes in will be posted in the correct docket. And that's really to ensure that those who aren't quite in the weeds of all of this regulatory rigmarole to get access to the system. We do encourage that and work with John really closely to make sure that your members are aware of opportunities if we have a rate case open, or if there's another docket. For example, the dockets to establish a low-income discount rate, which, that's something that is really impactful to AARP members. And, I know John's organized some great comments in those types of proceedings as well.
Well, that's great. So, I mean, this is really important for people to understand what your office does and the impact that it's having, and shudder to think about how much worse off we would be without the work of the Office of the Consumer Counsel. So we appreciate that. And so let me close by saying thank you to Margeret Lewis, one of our great AARP volunteers here in Connecticut. Margaret, thank you for helping us with this discussion this morning, and certainly thank you to Claire Coleman, the Consumer Counsel for the state of Connecticut. And Claire, any closing words before we leave?
I just remind everyone that we have detailed information about the rate changes that are taking effect July 1st on our website at ct.gov/OCC. So we encourage you to review the information. You can always contact our office if you have any questions. And we're just, again, really appreciative of the partnership with John and Nora and the AARP, and look forward to continuing to fight together to help reduce rates and maintain the quality service that customers deserve.
Well, that's great. And I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in to another episode of Coffee and Tea with AARP Connecticut. Join us again in 2 weeks for another episode, and catch back episodes on demand right here on our Facebook page or on our YouTube page. You can scan this QR code to become an e-advocate and help us advance policies important to people age 50 plus in Connecticut, whether it's before the legislature, Congress, or before the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.